Hey everybody, Anna Sabramwitz here. And today yes, it's a little later, but I thought, hey, I cannot leave you on Friday without heading you off with some sort of discussion about what we do as e-learning developers, storytellers, instructional designers, and learning experience designers. So I run coaching sessions, right, on 2 different days. One of them is Friday. So on Friday mornings, I'm totally doing, sessions with my students. But what's cool is we had this discussion come up, and I thought I wanted to explore it a little bit here in a casual way, and maybe help you think about this a little bit differently, which is, a lot of people say, hey, it's really difficult to work with stakeholders when they don't really understand what I do, and I'm so frustrated, or it's hard to explain to them why this is, what I do, and then when I show them stuff, they're all confused, and, all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, cool. This is something we got to talk about, because I think that we should be looking at it a little bit differently, okay? And I'll give you some really solid examples for that. So if that sounds interesting, or if this is something that you've struggled with yourself, you're in the right place, friend. So spend a couple of minutes with me. You better say hi in the chat, because I seriously love that. Okay, so now I want you to, and this came up because, when you're crafting, and I'm your interactive storytelling coach, so we craft interactive stories. They're not really commonplace these days, not yet, not if I have something to do with it. But one of the things that, we're always thinking about, and even when you do instructional design, is that we're crafting pieces and we have our own kind of process, right? We have our own instructional design process. And one of the things that I hear people always talking about is, oh, I'm an instructional designer and, nobody knows what I do. How do you explain this to, most people talk about like their family, that they can't explain it to their family, but how do you explain it to somebody who's, who you're trying to work with, right? And then one of the things that I think we kind of get a little bit too wrapped up in, and think about this, because this was a shift for me, is that your client doesn't need to be involved or doesn't need to have access to all of the minutia of your back-end development. So I used to, and this is just my experience. So I used to run projects, and the projects were kind of like, and I used a software called Basecamp. I loved it actually. When I worked in at certain organizations and they didn't have a good project management system, or they were like doing research on which one they should use, because a lot of times these huge organizations kind of stall because they need to get everybody's consensus and approval, and they need to do their due diligence. I was like, listen, I'm just going to pay for my own, because it helped me with my project. So I was fine dishing out the $40 a month, because I was using it. So I'm like, if you guys want to go with this, that's fine. But anyways, so one of the things that happened is, when you're working with stakeholders, you actually can involve them in every single part of a project, right? Which also means that they get to see the conversations and the minutia and the protocols that you have in place to actually make a project happen. And that doesn't necessarily, it's not a good thing, right? It's kind of like being, I don't need to show you how the sausage is made in the sausage factory, right? And so one of the things that I think you may not necessarily show somebody how everything is made, because they don't need to. Most times they don't, like if you're working with people in certain, at certain levels, right? They're not necessarily going to be like, oh, I need to understand this. I need to know what software you're using. If they're at the director level, what they really care about is you solving a problem, right? That's what's important. And so one of the things I think we struggle with is when you're sharing something with somebody, you feel that they need to have complete understanding of that, the back end of the realm, in order for them to contribute or to feel like they're getting value, right? And I don't know if this comes from the fact that we sometimes work on things that are abstract and we don't necessarily see the value immediately. So we're trying to kind of over-involve them in the project so they feel like they've got their time and money's worth, or that they feel, we're like, we got to involve them so they feel like ownership. We don't need to do that. If you're working with somebody and you're strategic about their input, and you're strategic about where they can add value, and you're very clear on that, and you're actually very clear on where you add value, then they don't need to see behind the scenes and have access to all the storyboards or your processes or anything like that until it's time to approve. And even with storyboards, you can be very strategic and say, listen, there's this particular scenario. I need you to give feedback on it. And then that's it, leave it. I don't need feedback on grammar, punctuation, all that stuff. We're not there yet, okay? I don't need any of that feedback. Now, it's kind of cool because I was thinking about this and I was like, if somebody was building a website for you, right? Let's say you don't know how to build websites. Most of us don't, right? It's a specialized skill. Do you think it would be fair for that person to be like, okay, listen, you don't understand code. I can't really build you anything until you understand code. So let me give you a tutorial on code, okay? You got to know the basics. Like, to be honest with you, I'd be like, what are you talking about? I want the product, right? I want you to build me the thing that'll solve my issue, which is me wanting to have a website. And the problem it's solving for me is my business, right? And I'm paying you to take care of that problem for me. I'm not paying you to educate me how to build websites. And so and there is a point where, yes, you have to show people what is a better experience. Like, I could be looking at my friend's 1980s website going, I want one of these. And your job is to be like, okay, that's cool, but no, it's not. Because look, the user experience here, this will get you the results that you want, right? So that person's job is not to be like, yeah, but they're using this code and scientifically this code doesn't work because it's been proven. No, nobody cares about that. What they care about is it gonna deliver the result, right? So I'm looking at this and I'm like, well, I've only seen 1980s kind of, websites. And I'm trying to make an analogy to, sometimes people tell you, they're like, we have PowerPoint and we need to get it online and we've seen this. Can you build us something like this? And your job is to say, what are you trying to accomplish, right? Yes, you're doing an analysis, of course. What's the vision? Because one of the things I think we're falling apart from is we're saying, okay, if I educate them enough about what I do, they'll be able to make better decisions on the back end. And that's not true. Like, there's no way you can teach somebody instructional design in a strategy session meeting. It's not possible, right? So one of the things you're trying to do, I think from the very beginning, is to say, what are they trying to do with that? And how can I help them? And how can I do that with as little friction as possible and with as little burden on them as possible? Because as we both know, or however many of us are here, one of the things that is a challenge is getting people's time for input. And if you're constantly inundating them with, like, I've heard of this people going, I've had 3-hour meetings with stakeholders and SMEs, and I'm like, why? What happened? Did you guys build a new city? Like, what happened during those 3-hour meetings? So you want to be strategic with that. And if you lead off with 3-hour meetings, nobody's going to want to meet with you again. So one of the things that I always say is, if you can be very strategic with where somebody can add value and then be appreciative when they do provide it, they'll want more of that. They'll actually give you time. So I've never had somebody who I've been very directive with saying, here's where I feel you can add so much value. I've been very specific with that, and they come back to me usually with some very awesome feedback around that. And I've learned that from where I haven't been that guiding, I haven't been that directive, and then they'll look at the process, they'll look at all the documents because they're like trying to add value, but they don't know where, and it kind of snowballs into other things, right? So one of the things I was thinking is, because we're trying to get people not to think about the project itself, and this came up in our group, is that the reason people get e-learning is not because they want e-learning, right? The reason they want an interactive story is not because they want an interactive story. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, gee, I can't wait to get an interactive story. It doesn't work that way. Some people do, but that's because they sell software about interactive stories, right? But people do wake up with things like, man, I wish I could I wish our, staff retention was a little better, so I wasn't doing all these darn interviews all the time trying to fill all these gaps. If we could just have a better onboarding, or if we could have better support for people who have been here for 3 months, or whatever that is. So there's problems that they're they're dealing with. They're also dealing with the especially at the higher level is how can we meet this quarter quotas? How can we increase our sales, right? So everything that they're thinking about is that problem, and how can you connect what you're doing with that problem that actually makes sense without being unrealistic about the fact that whatever problem you're solving is not going to be solved by the one thing that you provide, because there's good luck with trying to find a organization there where you can give them a single interactive story and all the problems are gone, right? Won't happen. And finally, I'm seeing the comments from you guys because I had to refresh. All right, so we've got Sixto and Daniel. That's great. Hey, you guys. So one of the things that I was thinking is when you're talking to your stakeholders or your clients, to move them out of the zone of here and now and sell them on a future that could be theirs, right? Which is what you're doing, is think about asking them a question like this. What is your champagne moment? What's your champagne moment? And what I think that does, and when I say champagne, is what's going to need to happen in the future that is, maybe related to this, maybe not, that you're going to be like, I need to get some champagne and celebrate. What's going to be that moment? And I think what happens is people will be like, they'll be a little bit more, you'll get a little bit more reality about what their expectations are, but also what things need to happen for them to actually be happy. Because I think a lot of times, and let me tell you, if somebody doesn't know where they're going to go, or where they, what the future is going to be like in 6 months, what they want it to look like, if they can't verbalize that to you, that means that whatever you produce for them will not make them happy, because you have no clue what you're aiming for, right? So if you can say, hey, what's your champagne moment? And if somebody says, you know what, my champagne moment is that I actually get promoted to the super director because this was a smashing success. And you're like, oh, okay, so this is the angle. This is what we're looking at. Or my champagne moment is that next year we get just as much budget for sales because people are actually, sales training, because people are actually going through the LMS training and we're actually seeing some gains over 6 months. Okay, all right. That gives me, you know what I mean? Like you're seeing those, how they frame those successes, because regardless of what your idea is, you're still going to have to bring those people on board and sell the value of what you're doing to them. You have to do that every single time you're interacting, right? So that's very, very important. So yeah, I hope that was helpful. I just wanted to talk through that. Sometimes I like to talk through things. It helps me conceptualize them better. But if you found that useful, that's awesome. Now, one of the things that I'd love for you to do is interactive storytelling. I have a webinar. It's free. It's at elearningsecrets.com. Now, what is super cool is not only that you get like 2 hours of amazing free training on that webinar, right? And basically at the end of it, you can be like, Anna, I'm going to craft my own interactive story. I got the examples, I got the framework, I got the questions that I'm going to ask the people that I'm working with. Boom, right? If you want help, there's opportunities for that. This is the other cool thing that's happening. So when you sign up for that webinar, if you can't attend it live or you want to wait for this, I'm going to be running some live webinars coming up. Now, what's really awesome about those webinars, other than the fact you get to participate, ask your questions, hang out with other people who are interested in interactive stories, which is cool. There's not that many of us yet. But I'll be introducing examples from my students. Because one of the things that's challenging, as you know, is in that webinar that I'm running right now that's on demand, there's tons of examples from the industry, right? Things that are public. And, we've had students put together their own interactive stories, but they're kind of for their companies. So it's not something I can be like, hey, everybody, check this out, right? But guess what? Over the past 6 months, we've gathered some solid pieces, and I'll be sharing them in that webinar as well. So if that's something that you're interested in attending and you want to, go to elearningsecrets.com and just register, and you'll be put on my mailing list. And as soon as those things are going live, probably in the next month or so, you'll be invited. I'll be running 2 sessions because I know there's a lot of people in Australia who love interactive stories. Talking to some of them next week. So I'm going to be running the sessions staggered. So watch out for that. If it doesn't fit your one time, I'm sure I'll be running a time that actually accommodates with your time zone a bit better. All right. So I hope that gets you excited. I hope you figure out what your stakeholders or clients' champagne moment is, and you find that as a useful way to help them imagine the future that could be theirs. And if you enjoyed this, better like it. There'll be more coming next week. All right, take care, friends. Bye.